Singer-songwriter Feist is with me here. Hi.
Hi.
It's nice to see you.
Yeah, you too.
Did you listen to the radio a lot when you were a kid, when you were growing up?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Yeah, at all times.
So,
well, okay, not at all times, but
a lot, though?
A lot of times, yeah.
And so, what do you remember about that? Like when you think about your first memories, like, do you have a first memory?
It's more like a constant chatter that probably I didn't pay any attention to as a kid, but at every family member of my every house in my family had a radio on the kitchen counter, and kind of just at all times there are these voices. So I think just subconsciously I got this kind of basically the CBC. It was always the CBC over my whole. I'm not just saying that.
Right.
But yeah, there's a sort of, almost like another family member tone of their voice that entered my mind as a kid.
Right. And so the first memories that come to mind are of talk radio. Yeah. It seems.
Well, and classical, I suppose. If I think about it, there was a lot of talking and then with classical music between it. I guess at my grandparents' house, and then at my mom's, there's, just mostly the talk radio and the kind of like king, 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 king of the news.
Right, right.
Tape sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't start actually paying attention and noticing until I was like a late teen or teenager.
Okay, so I want to come back to that. I remember my first memory was also, I remember musically hearing classical music and laying on the floor in front of the radio with my eyes closed and picturing movies and stuff. But do you remember hearing that classical music affecting you anyway, or was it more just kind of like
I just remember like being in a wet bathing suit padding through the kitchen to the cookie jar, that kind of thing. And I suppose it was probably when I started driving that you really start to pay attention to the radio, because you just feel. And my mom had a rule that if I borrowed her car, if she saw that the radio station had been changed, then she'd know I was listening, because the rule was that I wasn't supposed to listen to the radio while I drove, because I'm supposed to be concentrating on driving. Right. So there was a lot of like listening to the radio and then being really careful to get it back to the right station. So then I kind of subliminally learned exactly what CBC was, because that's her station. So yeah. Yeah.
And so when you did when you did begin to consciously listen, what were you looking for? What were you listening for? What jumped out at you?
Well, you can either end up playing radio roulette, where you're just scrolling, looking for the great song, like that'll be the soundtrack to 4 minutes. Or now I suppose that I always go to the CBC because I can't handle ads, and also the tone of humor and the kind of tone of humanity that's in those radio voices in the CBC. And I listen to records and I never remember who the record is that I love. It's like at some friend's house and I'm like, that thing of that, it sounded like the 50s, but there was sort of this like backup singer that was, I never remember. Right. I don't know the names of the people on the CBC except for your name, of course. and Sheila Rogers and Gian and, but all the shows that are kind of in between those like mammoth shows, there's all these other voices that are sort of speaking. They're like a little piece of humor or a little science-y interest or something. It's kind of the perfect balance. Yeah.
And then
I really didn't get paid off by the CBC to say this stuff.
And so some of that was some of the names that you mentioned, maybe I'll come back to, but I'm curious about music that you may have gotten from the radio. If listening to music on the radio was a different sort of thing for you, or if maybe there was some music that you discovered through listening to the radio.
Well, there's actually a bit of a famous radio story in my family is that I was listening to this AM 106 in Calgary when I was a kid, and it was basically like grooves in the heart, whatever. Right. I mean, it's like basically dance music. Right. There was like dumb contests every morning, and as a 13-year-old, you think it's so cool that you could win like 20 balloons or whatever the stupid stuff that they're. But I remember there being either oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? This is terrible. George Michael.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So there was a George Michael song I really loved. It was probably Faith or something.
Right.
And I had a tape deck and the radio, and I didn't know how to make anything record, so I knew that I could record into the air, so I just recorded through the air off the AM radio into the cassette so I could have the song.
Right.
And my brother, being much more, high fidelity type music nerd mind, like connector cables of gold, the kind of guy,
right.
He just made fun of me, lambasted me for years, because he's like, AM radio, first of all, sucks. And I'm like, why? I didn't know the difference between bandwidth stuff when I was
Right.
13 and I want to hear
Right.
George Michael,
Right.
And the fact that I could do it through the air and the dogs barking, and there's like,
Mm-hmm.
just like lots of ambient chaos inside my recording of Faith. So,
Right.
that was, I guess there was a lot of, you harvested off the radio back in the day before
Right.
there was
That's
any
right.
other way to.
That's right. Yeah, I think everybody
Your
did
memory
that.
worked differently too. Did you find you really remembered things because you couldn't just meet, refer back,
That's exactly right. I think our memories needed to be sharper.
Yeah.
Because, we didn't have some external device to store our memories on.
Exactly.
But then having said that, I remember I would tape songs off the radio, but then the same one over and over again. Like I didn't want to have
Who
to
was it?
rewind.
Oh.
I don't know, be a Duran Duran song or something, and there'd be,
Just the same song
tape
all in a row?
Yeah, every time it came on, or a Michael Jackson song, I just get so excited, I automatically record it, all over again.
That's so conceptual.
Yeah. Did you, was there a point, did you ever, when you were still young, discover Brave New Waves? It seems to me so many musicians had a Brave New Waves. I think late night CBC. Was that ever a thing for you?
Yes, I recognize the name, but I don't think I was truly, and to this day, I really am not a connoisseur. Like, I think there's a lot of magazines or shows like that are, you learn and you kind of harvest and you accumulate knowledge, and then you know who the this and the cool that, and I've really never been able to engage in that. Either I don't have the memory, or I'm more get into whatever the thing is that's being kind of like at the core of what's being told, rather than the kind of encyclopedic remembering of who made everything,
Right.
Which is, I think, a weakness, actually. But I think a show like that was a lot of this new thing and this
All
unknown
discovery.
and this
Yeah, that's
discovery.
right.
And I would listen and be like, yeah, but I would never remember the next day.
Right.
Whatever it was.
So now let's jump ahead a little bit, but while kind of keeping an eye on the past, where you were saying you grew up in a household where, the CBC was a constant, and it just became a thing, like a familiar sound that you knew. So after you started making music of your own, do you remember a time? Well, first of all, when you heard your music anywhere on the radio for the first time.
Mm-hmm. I do remember that. It definitely wasn't the CBC, because I was in a punk band. So it was the CJSW in Calgary. And I had my giant van that I'd bought for my band to tour in when I was 17, and I pulled over, and I just had this moment of total, which another moment that is lost forever, because now everyone's got cell phones, and I'd be like, hey, I'm on the radio,
Mm-hmm.
But just to be alone in that, with the kind of wind coming through some summer Alberta side of the road, kind of really just just picturing the, because we'd made everything ourselves, so. From the basement to the place that manufactured the cassettes, to choosing the purple one or whatever, and then photocopying the covers, and then somehow it gets to the radio station, and somehow I'm in my van and it's on the radio. You see the whole circuit, and then it's coming at you, and it's not yours anymore, because it's how did it get there? And for sure I remembered just how none of this makes sense, but this is so exciting.
Yeah. Now, it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when your solo career, really started to take hold and take off, in a big way, I guess would it be fair to say you were living in France at that point?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first times that your solo stuff was being played on the CBC, you were probably already whirlwinding around the world, and you maybe whirlwinding, yeah. But do you have a memory of hearing yourself on the CBC? Or maybe you were here, maybe it was an interview or something. Maybe you were on the other side of the speaker.
Well, I do remember, it probably wasn't the first time, but one of the cringiest was when I was on Gion's show for the first time. And, you know, he does these little kind of informative essays before.
Right.
And I almost felt like he was being so cruel because he found every recording I had ever made.
Oh, no.
And he made kind of this mashup, like starting with Placebo and then, you know, like some dance song that I did for like 5 minutes that I was hoping had gone away forever. And then, you know, just all the pieces of the puzzle, like Broken Social Scene and By Divine Right and Monarch, my first record from the 90s. And you know, it's just the whole thing. And as I was sitting there, it was almost like one of those like, Leslie Feist, this is your life. And
right.
I was having this like audio flashback thing happen. And I remember that being like, how did they do that? How did they find all those things, you know?
You described that as cringy. Do you have a hard time going back and listening to some of the old stuff?
Well, everything in its own context makes sense. You know,
Right.
you remember it as being, I was 16 or,
Of course.
or like it was that time when Massive Attack was everywhere and everyone got confused for a minute about what they were supposed to be doing, you know,
Right.
I don't know, just all sorts of things happening. And then, you know, and then to have it all mashed next to each other, like a whole decade basically squished into 30 seconds. Not fair. It's not
Right.
fair. But it's also I mean, at the time it was kind of cringy because it was, you're really trying to stand next to your new thing. And this is like really where I am now. And you're like, yeah, but you were also there. And it was kind of like one of those little like
Yeah.
don't take yourself so seriously, kid, kind of thing. Yeah.
You mentioned Gian, and earlier you mentioned Sheila Rogers as one of your favorites. And before we sat down here to chat, you mentioned maybe this is now me being cruel and bringing up, you know, secret past stuff. But you mentioned you had kind of fantasized about being on the radio. If you ever did have a radio show of your own, what do you imagine that would be? Would it be a music show or not even necessarily?
I think that I would know where to take CBC.
Yeah, I think everybody does. Well, tell me about that.
Well, I just think radio dramas are gone.
That's right.
And it would be more in the old style with the Foley crunch glass and just like really live and have an audience and you put on a play and it's a radio drama. And like, I think it's more like not even writing new ones. It's like going back to the kind of heyday of these, you know, because that was the ultimate when people didn't have any. It was before any visual, before TV, you know, and people would sit next to the radio and they would see this whole story unfold and it's engaging their imaginations and, you know, they have to make a movie in their minds. And so I don't think it would necessarily be me trying to, because I don't think I have the grace and, you know, basically intelligence to be one of those CBC people who's just like on the mark at all times with the exact tone of like kindly uncle and aunt kind of sound, you know?
Yeah, right.
But I think I could.
You could be like a producer or director or something.
Exactly.
Well, that's interesting, and that might come into play when I get into asking you about your records some. But just one last question about all this stuff, and maybe you already answered it. But I mean, there's so much media now, and there's so many places people can go to get anything media-related, music or otherwise, and on the internet, it's so easy.
Yeah.
But I mean, what is it about radio? I mean, you just mentioned something about the way it appeals to one's imagination, but I mean, it's, you know, it's crazy times for media and radio, but, you know, what is it about radio, and is it something that is still near and dear? Do you hope it's something that, you know, lives forever? Is there something that makes it special outside of all these other choices that people have?
I think as long as there's people making decisions about what goes on the radio, like, you know, maybe still keeping it feeling like a kind of a family affair, or like maybe there's you can listen to some of these shows and you hear individual minds having come up with, you know, they're curating you towards an understanding of a new thing. And as long as that continues, I think it's like a super relevant and important thing. I don't think, and I guess that's a thing like the CBC, or maybe like college radio when someone is given an hour and they're you know, they do whatever they want in that hour and they play their crazy record collection or whatever they do, or they talk to the hyper political person that they happen to know and they bring in and give them access to that, you know. I think that kind of stuff is interesting. I don't listen to the rest. I think there's tons of stuff going on. It's just sort of playing the same 18 songs on rotation with ads in between, and that's a bit of a shame. I think it's not. Maybe it's taken people away from like wanting to have their own record collection because they can just listen to the 4 Rolling Stones songs they remember from high school or something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think as long as it stays like, you know, if there's Sukyin Lee's and Jian's and yourself and, you know, just Sheila Rogers and all those minds behind what you're hearing, then yeah.
So you appreciate and it seems respond to some curation. That seems important to you.
Yeah, but not like a committee decision curation. More like someone with tons of curiosity and an insane work ethic who's bringing like consistently every week. You can just rely that there's going to be this. I mean, I don't know how they do it. I don't know how you guys do it. I mean, honestly.
Well, let's shift gears here a little bit because I want to talk with you about your record. And I've spent some time with it, and it knocked me out. And the first thing I did is I just read down the list of titles.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I cried. Just the titles alone. And there was so much that I was struck by. And it seems that there's some really interesting and new terrain, it seems to me, being explored musically. It seems like there's some sadness on this record. There was a moment or two that almost felt like there was even a little bit of, I don't know, anger? I mean, is that fair to say? Was I hearing that? Or if not anger, some frustration?
I tried to declare a little more on this record rather than mull.
Right.
And I think it's... I mean, what I've noted from having now made a few records is that I then live in them by playing them live over and over. And you start to hear the things you've planted in your songs, your own self. Selfishly, you start to reinterpret them, or you have now 5 years distance from that moment you wrote it. And one day it comes out of your mouth and you see it like, oh my God, I didn't even know it could mean that too, you know? Mm-hmm. But you have to be careful because those things can lead you down circuitous pattern paths in your own mind. And I felt this time like I've noted some things to be true, like Declaration of Independence style, like what is it? We behold these truths to be self-evident, or we have noted these truths, or some things are true over and over. And so I tried to just sort of declare some of those observations rather than, rather than whatever it was I was doing previous.
Well, I definitely felt that. If you're up for it, I'd like to kind of just dive into it, like track by track. Mm-hmm. The first song on the record is called The Bad in Each Other. Mm. Right? And I was very excited to hear what the first song would sound like. A lot of anticipation for me, like I'm sure for a lot of people, after the last couple records, and it sounded and felt different to me right away. But then I heard your guitar, and I knew it was you. I don't know how aware of this you are, but to me it's unmistakable. There's a real signature, I think, that you've established with your guitar, and it packs a real emotional punch for me, and it's heavy. There's a heaviness there, maybe even... I think if I put every song of yours on a scale, maybe that one, to me, felt like it was the heaviest. And then this big impressive ending. So, I mean, those were the things I felt. But what were you thinking? What was going into this song when you made it? Or what were you thinking about?
Well, I guess... I haven't talked about each song yet. Well, there's... in the track listing and deciding what's first, and you kind of have the whole array of everything you've made. And I wanted to, if it's been a while since I made a record. I mean, it's not been that long since I finished touring the last one, but it had been 5 years and many, many gigs and many experiences since I'd made something. So, I thought that rather than the last 2 records began quite... me sort of narrator of the story, pulling in, like kind of setting a scene. It was a little bit more like just start with the bones, just like percussion, just start with the bashing bones,
Yeah. The next song is called Graveyard. That's the second song, and I had this fantasy where I was imagining a scenario where you could be standing on stage, and you could say something like, "Here's a song called Graveyard that everybody can sing along to." There's a sing-along kind of element to it, but then it's a song called Graveyard. It's an interesting idea to me to take a concept, even if you're just going by the title of something that seems kind of dark, and turn that into a sing-along. What can you tell me about that song?
Well, without necessarily talking about the song, I did observe something when I went to Mexico City around the Day of the Dead, and it's not a morose place.
Right.
The way that they have enveloped death, which is something that is absolutely as real as life. This is a thing that I'm starting to discover. They take an opportunity to kind of bring their memories anyway back to life of the people, and they kind of honor everybody once a year, and the graveyards are filled with candles, and they're literally people laying on the tombstones, like partying, drinking, pouring booze into the tombs, just like cooking little cook fires, and they're making meals, and they're just hanging out with the people that have died, and anyway, that was I went and saw that after I'd written the song, but I kind of thought, yeah, why do we have it be such a morose? I mean, it's of course like deeply sad to have to go through that, but it's not. But those people aren't only the sad thing that the punctuation mark at the end. We've been all taught to make it. So there's a moment when you have to also remember they were very much alive at one point, like every single person in there, and
right.
It's a bit like a film device, I'm sure, from like. Hitchcock or something to make it all so spooky,
right. Right.
It's just something, it's a bit like archetypical imagery that we all are fed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It doesn't need to be so dark,
Yeah. Caught Along Wind. To me, it felt like almost like everything, including the kitchen sink type thing, musically speaking. There's a lot of music in it, just a lot of instrumentation. There's a lot going on. And I was trying to put my finger on the sound or where it all came from. At first, I almost thought there's something about this almost sounds African to me. Were you going for anything specific musically, or was it very much like let's throw a lot of stuff at it? Or
well, it's funny because as much as there's a lot going on, it's all of this subtle kind of waiting. There was a lot of arrangements that were made where people were just waiting, and they can wait, and they might be picking up their bells for the next part or something, or just putting something down and getting their next thing. But the decision to leave every mic that was in the room open, like meaning we didn't like comb away ears like these that had listened to various aspects of the room and the song. We just left them all open on the mix. So it does make this kind of air, sort of pressure, this sort of air pressure that of all that waiting, because there's barely any playing in that song, actually. There's just all this kind of trickling down of and then arriving at sort of thing.
And so was the band or the musicians that were assembled in the room on this song given any sort of instruction? Was it like, okay, the mics are on, all these instruments are here, let's just see what I mean, you said there was an arrangement though, so I mean,
yeah, it's very delicate. It's precision arrangements, and I suppose nothing's accidental except the air and the leaving of like every mic open.
Right.
Because the same 5 people made the whole record. We were a real like an ensemble, if not a band, because it was truly brought together just to make a record, and then everyone scattered around the globe again. But those 5 people, we arranged for a month. Really just made it like a show, like a lot, like so we could just play it, kind of like what we're doing now, except at the end we'll be on tour. But we did the exact same process, and at the end we went into the studio and just pressed record and tried to make them be, well, in every case they are just live performances. So there's a lot of everyone became quite in tune with the kind of sonic palette and the general kind of heart of the whole endeavor. You know, it wasn't so much like, don't play your bass and then just, it was more like everyone knew what the song's the end destination was, and everyone's intelligent enough musically and as humans in their hearts, they know how to get there, you know?
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about how the decision was made to release the song that was released first.
Oh, yeah, that wasn't my decision. It's interesting. As a musician, yeah, there's other people involved in that.
Yeah. So it's a song called "How Come You Never Go There."
Yeah. Okay. I should actually just stand next to it. The truth is, I have no misgivings about the song whatsoever. I think I have a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to when things are taken out of context. But I mean, it's just. I think it's just part of the puzzle. It's like it's a modern puzzle that we're all faced with, and just like take your tweezers and pluck a song that's like, and you just like throw it out on its own, and it doesn't have its comrades to protect it and make it make sense in context. And I guess it's just part of the puzzle. But
so, how does that feel? Does that make you like? Is it scary? I guess it's that first baby bird being dropped out of the nest, and you hope it figures out how to fly. I mean, what's that like when the first one is kind of sent out there to the world?
Well, an envoy would be carrying a message of the army behind. So I'm hoping at least it carries some relevant message because the envoy doesn't arrive and then the army just turns around and leaves, and then whoever invited the messenger in, then says, okay, stay here forever or something. They're really just there to deliver a message, and the rest is en route. And I guess I just want the army to hurry up and get there, because I don't want this song to be the only thing speaking on behalf of the record anymore. It's just not the truth.
Right.
But God, see, I'm complicated. This is not. It shouldn't be this complicated.
Well, it seems to me that making these sorts of decisions, or choosing like a sequence, like an order of the songs from the album, these sorts of things must be agony.
Well, I chose the first song on the record because I want that to be the beginning. That's the one I would have begun the whole awareness of this record. That's what I would have liked. Mm-hmm. But I am very fortunate to have record labels that I work with, and I have no illusions about working alone. I did that for years, so I'm open to not trying to like white knuckle the whole thing.
Right. So yesterday I was listening to the record, and very intensely listening, very closely, and I don't know what had happened to me earlier in the day that maybe I was a bit on edge, or I don't know what, but I was listening to a commotion. And then there was that moment finally, and there's some tension that builds at the beginning, and then these male voices come jumping out, which I wasn't expecting, and I actually jumped. It startled me. I was sitting down, but I actually kind of jumped up off my seat. A little bit.
Amazing.
And then I had bad dreams.
Oh.
That night. That song had a real effect on me.
Oh.
And there's just this real, like I said, a real sense of tension in it. And I mean, the song is called a commotion, and it kind of sounds like a commotion. And there's some fascinating textures going on musically in this one. Were you going for that? I mean, it seemed you seemed to like that.
No, I wanted it to be super relaxing, and well, I've often sung my own backup, so I wanted to have some masculine power on this one. So, and shit's flying off the handle, and and it should sound like that if that's what you're talking about, and just stir it up. Just gotta stir it up.
Yeah, well, it got a strong reaction from me, and I mean that you always have some good art when it gets a strong reaction from somebody. I have a thought on the song "The Circle Married the Line." When a circle marries a line, it forms the letter P, and the P stands for pretty.
Oh. Oh my God, you solved the puzzle. P stands for puzzle.
Okay, all right.
No. Well, I hope everyone will have make up their own vision as you did.
It is very pretty. It's a very pretty song.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm not going to solve that puzzle.
Yeah, that's fine. And I think everyone enjoys a puzzle.
Yeah.
I guess the one question I was curious about, and you can choose to answer it or not, but in the order in which you wrote these songs, where did that one fall? Did you write it early in the group or later? Was it somewhere in the middle? Do you remember?
I was trying to think of how this happened the other day, because I wrote it all in about 3 months, and it all happened simultaneously. Like, you know how it is. You work on one little fragment and then another one, and then you wonder if they'll have anything to do with each other. And I remember at one point wishing there was a way to have sonic Post-it notes or something, because I was losing track of so many pieces of the puzzle. And but there is actually no way to make sound into vision. Like, you wouldn't write down the melody that goes kind of like this. I mean, there's no way.
Right.
So some things were lost and other things glued themselves to something else real quick, because then they're easy to remember as a team, like some words and a melody together. And but it all was built really, it's like a bit all at once. And that's kind of why they all refer to each other in different kind of ways. But I don't know where that came in.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. There's some interesting connections between songs that I wanted to check on a bit. Maybe I'll just ask you about one or two more. But when I hear people talk about your music, people talk about your voice all the time, and that seems to come up first. And I hear people talk about your guitar playing a lot. But the thing I wish I heard about more is your lyrics, because I think you're a really amazing lyric writer. And there were two lyrics that jumped out at me in the song Bittersweet Melodies. First of all, slow dancing trees is just a really beautiful image.
I have willow trees.
So this is from your yard? Was this something you just saw out your window?
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
But then another thing that really jumped out at me, and I don't know how much you'll want to talk about this, but something that to me was maybe the most fascinating moment on the album.
Oh, I'm so curious.
Was the line and the way everything that's happening around it musically, when you sing the line about the telephone always ringing, and everything drops away, and that's really held, and it almost seems like I'm picturing the sheet that you wrote those lyrics on, and that was underlined maybe twice.
Those ellipses dotting all the way out onto the desk.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything that you would want to say about that. I mean, it sounded to me like, those times where I think everyone gets to this point, sometimes where it's like, I just want to be left alone.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much hitting the nail on the head, or at least the incessant activity of contact that we all have. It kind of dilutes any potential for one. I mean, there's sort of, I guess there's the sanctity of like the duo and the silence around that or something, and just like that being active enough that you don't need to have all this stuff coming in at you all the time. I mean, that's sort of a lost art, I think.
Are you good at turning the phone off?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes, I'm very good at it. I don't often know where it is, and people don't believe me. My mom will be like, "Hey, you don't call me back." I'm like, "It's because I didn't check for a couple days." I have most of the people I want to be talking to are right here, so I have plenty to keep my mind busy.
Right. Well, I got a million questions, but I'll just jump to a couple more quick ones. First of all, let me just say that in the song "Comfort Me," the first line of that song almost knocked me right off my chair. That's one heck of a first line.
Oh.
And for those listening, it's when you comfort me, it doesn't bring me comfort, actually.
Well,
and you don't have
truth hurts.
Sure, and you don't have to go into it, but I just remember thinking that's a very strong opening line. Do you ever have the experience where you're writing and you think, "Oh yeah, that's a good one"?
I guess sometimes there's going to be something worth like building on or something.
So that's where it started?
Or anyway, those declarations I was saying, rather than couching things in, "Oh, but maybe this might also be true. Oh, well, maybe, and like tomorrow this will be true." Just like sometimes there's things that just no matter what other things change, like somewhere on earth that is true.
Right.
Not necessarily for you at all times or for you at all times. It's like, but there's certain things that universally keep recycling back into our, you read books from 300 years ago. They're living the identical same passion plays that we are, Mm-hmm. And in 300 years, unless everybody are like Houellebecq's version of the future, then I think we will all be in the same state.
Right. Well, that's a powerful line, and it's a powerful record, and I really love it. And I think we're getting the signal just to wrap it up, because I guess there was some housekeeping things they wanted you to do. But the last thing I was going to ask you, and I think you answered it with the other thing, with like the mics up thing, but with the last song, what's it called? Get it right. Get it wrong. Get it right.
You have to end on a positive.
Yeah. And I was trying to picture like the room where you were when this was being recorded, because there's so much of that ambient noise and stuff, and I was trying to identify what some of them were, and I had this image that came into my mind, which I liked, and I was picturing you, and you kind of allude, I think, to a water or a river in it, and I was picturing you floating down a river, and the forest was on fire on each bank.
Would you like to direct a video?
Sure.
That's the studio was actually a river surrounded in a fire, and there was people running with microphones just next to me in the river. So that's crazy that you actually caught that.
Huh.
Wow. Yeah.
I thought it was crackling, though. I thought, are you near a fire? It might have
Yes.
been. Oh, you were?
Well, the river is surrounded. No. Yeah, no, there was a wood stove in there, yeah.
Okay.
It was the only source of heat, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks, for going through all that. I know that's a bit grueling to...
No, but it's like I said, I finished it like mere weeks ago.
Well, thanks.
Thanks.